Second item is the approval of the October 31st, 2022 meeting summary. Have a motion.
So move.
Second. Motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries unanimously. On to item number 3, our consent agenda items for informational purposes. Items like to be pulled for discussion or questions. None. We can move on to item number 4. The Arizona Department of Transportation Safety Performance Projections. I believe we have a presentation from staff, Mr. Mitchell.
Yes, David is on Zoom, so go ahead, David.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, and Farhad for the introduction. Today, I am bringing forward the ADOT 2023 safety performance projections. Let's see. This is an annual exercise that we've been, as an agency, PAG has been participating for the past 5 years. It originated with the FAST Act, and it is a program that's at the state level and requires NPO participation. The way that PAG supports the program is by tracking and reporting on the safety measures for the PAG region, for the PAG planning area. These are the 5 performance measures that have safety projections adopted by ADOT for next year. The first column, these are the actual numbers that they project based on the trends of the last 5 years. And then the second column is the 5-year average of that same time period. These are the projections based on that data for next year. And as you can see, they are not favorable. In fact, they are trending in the negative direction than what we would desire. But this is what the state foresees as a statewide occurrence for these 5 projections. And we'll go into each one individually so you can understand those. The first one is a number of fatalities. This is again statewide. The red bars are the actual annual totals, and then the 2 yellow bars you see on the right are the forecasted figures based on their trend methodology. And then the green line that you see is the rolling 5-year average. So you can see for the past approaching 10 years, we've been on a pretty steep incline statewide with number of fatalities. And the state sees that trend to continue. The rate of fatalities is determined by vehicle miles traveled. And you can see the rate. We're driving more and we're seeing more fatalities on the roadways. Related to not quite fatalities, but serious injuries, these are your incapacitating injuries. These have been on a slight decline for the last long period, as you can see, but they're starting to plateau and level off. ADOT sees a slight increase in the number of serious injuries that we see on our roadways. And the rate for that is determined the same way as fatalities, and the trend for those follow the same trend for the total number of serious injuries. And there's also performance measures that tracks bicycle and pedestrians. This is your non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. Here, they also see an increase in these totals. These again are statewide. And so in review of how the program works, this is to fulfill FAST Act requirements. It's a federal program. These are projections. They're not in any ways aspirational targets. For example, PAG uses aspirational targets in our RMAP, our long range plan. And those are the measures that we track to, that we try and achieve. And these numbers that we're dealing with today are different. These are basically forecasts or projections at the state level based on the trends that we're seeing. And that is all I have. I'll leave it to you, Mr. Chair, to open it up for discussion. And this is an action item. And the request is to recommend Regional Council's adoption of ADOT's 2023 state safety projections. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. For discussion, is there a motion?
Just a question for you, David. Has there been any information that's been studied with regard to cause of the increase in fatality rates? Is it speedy? Is it drug-induced DUI? Is it roadway? I can tell you, driving I-10, I rarely go to Phoenix anymore and take I-10. I take the back road because almost every time I take I-10, there's a serious collision. So is there any studies or information available through this that says, that gives the why behind?
There's been numerous reports that basically there's quite a few factors. You mentioned speeding. That is a huge contributing factor to crashes in general. And with higher speeds, you have worse crashes. And so that could be leading to a lot of it. There's human behavior elements. You mentioned substance abuse, DUIs. That's a contributing factor. There are other human factors, distracted driving, cell phone use, and other distractions as well. There's numerous effects. Some of it can be traced to roadway design. There's a huge mix of it. Some of it could be lack of education and obedience of laws. Reports of driving wrong on the wrong direction on the freeways. There's a lot of contributing factors. We do have the data at hand, and that is actively used by our transportation planning committee members, as well as those in our transportation safety and system subcommittee. So those are always at the forefront whenever safety is in concern. It is going to take a community effort to address this. It's not something that we can design away through just throwing money at roadway projects.
So cause of collisions, is that information that could be made available to us?
Yes, we do have that information. We have data as current as 2021, and the 2022 data will start coming in as the months go by. But that 2022 data is usually not official until about mid-year of the following year, and that's because of the way that the reporting, the crash reports get fed into the ADOT system. Every agency has a different process and means of getting into the system, and there's usually a 5 to 6 month lag for when we can say we have official numbers. So I would say July to August we'll have numbers for 2022, but we do have those numbers available in a program we call our PAG Safety Explorer tool that is available to our members.
But sort of a follow-up to Terry's, is the decrease in the serious injuries, is that car construction and then the safer vehicles? What's caused that?
Yeah, just like the other question, there's a mix. There's a lot supporting arguments that the vehicles are being designed to absorb the impact and keep people inside safe, with the use of airbags and other safety seatbelts and systems, and those are required, of course, for the user to use and operate them appropriately. But there's other instances, and since speed could be a factor. It could take what would be a 25-mile-an-hour crash, which would not be a fatality if it was at 45 miles an hour. It could become more serious related crash. So there's arguments too that the impacts of the crash are shifting, not necessarily being mitigated away, if you would. So, and also they could be lessening. They could be going from serious injury to less serious in the same manner.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that the management committee recommend the adoption of these safety performance projections.
Second. And then a second. Any further discussion?
Just out of curiosity, David, so why do we have to do this? And I was looking at it. I mean, I understand it's part of the federal government requirement, but can you walk us through why we're doing this? It's a technical document, basically, or an analysis, and I'm not sure what the policy pieces of this are. Can you walk us through that?
Sure, I could do that. Thank you for the question. I believe this is Mr. Ortega.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Ortega and members of the committee, There is a reporting and accountability process that occurs at the state level. As far as the MPO level, there is no policy action other than the requirement to participate. There are two options. We could either adopt the state targets or we can adopt our own as a planning area. Discussion with at the federal level and with our ADOT partners, the best guidance and the national best practice is for the MPO to adopt the state targets. And the reason for that is the way that the federal ruling is structured is there is no reporting accountability or recourse for the MPO should it not make its projections. Whereas in the state level, there's an action that's required. So, for example, the state ADOT has failed to meet 4 of these 5 performance projections over the first performance reporting period, and therefore they're having to go through a federal reporting process on tracking safety specifically that was not a requirement of them before. As an MPO, we are not, even though we've been participating and supporting ADOT targets, we have no recourse or participation in this reporting or accountability program, which is more of by participating, we just have the option to establish our own. To my knowledge, has not been any benefit brought forward for us to do so. We would use the same data and methodology as the state, and most likely would come up with very similar projections. The state sets their projections on a conservative level, and they're currently using trend data prior to COVID to get the best feel for it, because the projection that they set have to be reasonable and justifiable, and based on that, they're able to do so when going through the federal reporting process. So I hope that answers your question. I know it's a lot to chew on and a lot long-winded answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think that answers the question. Going back to Terry's point about the way that the data is generated and the availability of that. What I don't want for us as a region is to get in a position where we are making a recommendation that we can't live with down the road, because that puts us in a bad spot. And the impression I get from this is that feds want to just check the box and say, hey, PAG approved this, and so what's your problem over this, right? And that makes me nervous. I understand it's almost pro forma and it doesn't necessarily matter because it's ADOT's numbers or metrics, but I think it puts us in a potentially tough spot down the road if we are able to do whatever, just pick it, right? Pick the metric. So that's just my commentary. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure, Dagan. Any other questions or comments? None. I have a motion and a second on the floor to recommend adoption of the Arizona Department of Transportation State Transportation Safety Projections. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion passes. On to item number 5, fiscal year 2022-2026 Transportation Improvement Program Amendment for 2022 .060. Staff presentation from Jamie Brown.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. The Management Committee will be asked to recommend approval of an amendment to the fiscal year 2022 through 2026 TIP. There are 3 items with this amendment. Item A deprograms $2,509,000 of surface transportation block grant program funds, or STBG funds, in fiscal year 2023 on project TIP ID 84.06 Grant Road Railroad Underpass reconstruction. Item B programs $1,385,000 of STBG and $716,000 of highway and infrastructure program funding as outlined in the supplemental notice of funding availability in fiscal year 2023 on project TIP ID 10.18 Sunset I-10 to River. And item C programs $1,400,000 of State Highway User Revenue Fund 2.6 funds in fiscal year 2023 on project TIP ID 30.16 I-10 Ina to Ruth Roth. And all this information is in your packet. And let me just briefly explain before we ask for action. PAG's Transportation Planning Committee recommended approval of item A for this TIP amendment on December 14th. On December 13th, PAG staff issued the supplemental NOFA, and only one response was received by the deadline. PAG staff reviewed the application against the NOFA and determined that the project meets the eligibility requirements, including that the project is already federalized, is an RTA roadway element project, and federal funds can be obligated by May 15th of 2023. Based on these findings, the TIP amendment includes item B. Additionally, on December 21st, ADOT staff sent a written request to PAG staff for an amendment to the project for item C. The additional funds are needed to cover bid costs that have exceeded the engineer's estimate. Given their proximity, the construction of the project for item C, I-10, Ina to Ruthrock, is being managed and closely coordinated with the project for item B, Sunset I-10 to River project, both requiring an expedited TIP amendment process. The expedited TIP amendment process is consistent with the adopted TIP policies and procedures and allows these items to be considered by the regional council at the next scheduled meeting, which is January 26th. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Happy to take any questions. And this is an action item.
Questions? Comments? Entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Motion carries unanimously. Mr. Brown. And with that, that brings our meeting to a close. We will adjourn our meeting. Everyone.
All right.
Mike.
Thank you.
I do want to just point one little tiny thing out. We didn't take a vote on consent. Did ask for if there was anybody wanting to pull that case number.
Down.
We didn't vote, so I'm good with it. I just wanted to.
He's not going to turn on.
Oh, that's right. He is. Well, that's right.
You're ready, ready. Are you ready to?
Exactly.
We have farm, right?
Well, let's wait for Jen to come back.
Really do.
I don't know if we need to wait for Julie.
Our three CAC members online and our three CAC officers in the room. Thank you for being here. Just wait for Dan to join us and we'll get started after that.
Tom, I thought you were gonna have 7. Did you change your mind on that?
I'm sorry.
I thought you were gonna have 6 plus you. Was there, did you change your mind on that?
Yeah.
All right, Jan. All right. So with that, we'll call the meeting to order and get started. I want to thank everybody for being here. Just as a reminder, and thanks to the discussion at the last TMC meeting on the conversation, yielded the kind of the reason for being here today. So obviously we're here today as a working group of the TMC, which consists of all the jurisdictional members. So we got the 9 jurisdictional members. And then with Terry being the liaison on the TMC for the CAC, coordinating with our officers. Thank you for the officers for being here. CAC officers and Terry coordinated and invited 3 other CAC members. They are here as well on Zoom. So we have 6 members of the CAC and 9 members of TMC, and we hope to have a good, productive conversation and provide feedback to the CAC. As you all know, CAC has been working actively to develop a list of named projects and had a good meeting just last Monday. And it was very productive recommendations to move forward to this meeting. So we'll go over that. We'll have a handout for you to outline what those questions are or the recommendations for input from this group are. And then I'm going to rely on the officers to hopefully help and let us know if there's anything else we want to take back to the CAC. So with that, and Shane, thank you. Shane had a suggestion last time that do we need an outside facilitator or not? And talking to several folks, it appeared that maybe, at least for this session, we can do it among ourselves and we don't need an outside facilitator. But in the future, obviously, if there is a need, we'll explore that opportunity as well. So with that, I'll turn it back to Paki. Paki can summarize hopefully what we hope to accomplish today, and then maybe either Tom or the vice chairs from the CAC can hopefully chime in and let us know what you hope to get from this meeting as well.
Good morning, and thank you again for coming to this special ad hoc working group. It's nice to see everyone in the room. As Farhad said, we have our 3 officers here, Chairman McGovern, Vice Chair Campbell, and Vice Chair Mary Burris. And we also have the 3 members, Brian Keeley, Jamie Colley, and Patricia Schwartz remotely. And also thank you to Terry, who's been our liaison and can help us navigate today. What we're hoping to do today is go over just a few slides about the meeting format and the refinement process. This is similar to what we described to the CAC on Monday. And then we have our staff, Planning Director Jeanette Duran, who's going to help facilitate on the portal, pull up the information, look at the rankings, look at the project information, in addition to the materials that we received in the packet. So again, our main focus for today is that fiscal constraint of the, $2.1 billion refined list that we can take back to the CAC at their next meeting, which is on January 23rd. At one point, whoops, sorry, I already increased it, 1.1 billion.
I thought we were done.
Yeah. And we've achieved that. Thank you. So that this, Crystal, do you have the slide? Okay, we can move forward. Okay, so again, 1.1 billion, sorry for adding that extra billion. Some of the questions that we talked to the CAC and we're asking you as you go through your refinement process today to determine which projects to remove are, which projects provide the least benefit to the regional transportation network, so, and again, that's from a regional perspective. So something to consider as you go through the list. Also, what's going to maintain a good geographic distribution of investments? And also which projects are not truly named projects and could be addressed under the RTA, other RTA elements. And as always, we're always focusing on what will the voters support. Next slide. Some of the steps we discussed at Monday's CAC meeting to help with the refinement process is, and that we want to share with you is, the CAC reviewed the list and they would like some feedback from you today from their meeting on Monday. So we're asking that you review that feedback. There is a handout that we will pass out right now so that you can start looking at it. This was a handout that was sent to you last night. It's not in your packet. So for today's discussion, you'll be reviewing that feedback and we're hoping to finalize the list of named projects. At the moment, there are 32 potential projects that you discussed last time that the CAC has been reviewing. And then we have 9 additional projects that were suggested by the CAC as to the what's missing projects. So these additional 9 will be reviewed by you as well today, and then you'll determine what to remove from there and then what further refinements need from the additional 32. And of course, our goal is to produce, your goal for today is to produce a refined draft list of named projects for the CAC meeting on January 23rd. Next slide. Just to give you a geographic perspective of the 41 projects, this is what it currently looks like with the draft list. This is again, the 32 projects plus the 9 additional that the CAC felt was missing. So today's discussion will focus on what to keep and what to remove. And of course, keeping in mind that 1.1 billion fiscal constraint. Next slide. So this is a geographic distribution of the 5 projects from the Southeast area. So there were 9 projects that the CAC would like feedback on. 5 of these are in the Southeast area. I'll go through the segments in a moment, but this is something that the CAC would like feedback on. Next slide. So what we did here is we took the 5 projects and divided them into 3 sections. So again, these are in the Southeast Vale area. These are the ones that the CAC felt were missing from the initial list. And they consist of, the first section is number 3647, the Marianne Cleveland Way, Houghton Road to Tucson city limits. And then number 476, Marianne Cleveland Way from Vista del Lago to Colossal Cave. The second section consists of the 2 of the Colossal Cave projects, number 395, Colossal Cave number 1, which is I-10 to Marianne Cleveland Way, only the unincorporated segments. And then number 3646, the Colossal Cave Road, Tucson City Limit to Dawn Drive project. And then the third section is the third Colossal Cave, the Colossal Cave Road number 2, number 396, which is from Marianne Cleveland Way to Camino Loma Alta. And again, the request today is to determine, do you want to move all of these forward? Do you want to move segments, a section of these forward? So that will be the discussion today. Next slide. There were also 3 projects in the Northwest area out of the 9, and 1 possible replacement that the CAC is looking for feedback on. Here's a map of the segments. Then next slide. And these projects consist of the number 2546, the Thornydale Road from Cortero Road to Camino del Norte. Number 1535, Ina Road number 3, which is I-10 to Camino de la Tierra. And then number 473, the other Ina Road from Cañada del Oro Wash to Paseo del Norte. The other idea was to replace number 473, which is the Ina Road CDO Wash to Paseo del Norte, with number 3569, the Orange Grove Road number 1, which is from La Cholla Boulevard to Oracle Road. So that's another discussion item for today. Next slide. And then finally, out of the 9, one project was suggested as being moved forward to complete the Drexel corridor. Next slide. This is this shows what the full Drexel corridor would look like if this segment was added. And this is the one on the far left west side. And again, the CAC is looking for your feedback on this. Next slide. And again, this is the Drexel Road corridor, number 472, which is from Cardinal Avenue to Mission Road. And then 2 other projects are mentioned as, quote, controversial, kind of heartburn projects. And the CAC would like your input today on consider removal from the list. The first one is the Sonoran corridor from I-19 to I-10, the new limited access roadway. This would be the right-of-way purchase only segment. And then the other project that was felt to be controversial was number 3660, the 6th Avenue Ronstadt Transit Center to Tucson International Airport. So again, another item for discussion for today. Next slide. And once again, here's that geographic distribution of the 41 projects, determining what to keep and what to remove. Next slide. And again, I'm just putting up these questions again. What we're planning to do now is Jeanette Duran's going to facilitate with keeping these questions in mind. All of these projects, she'll pull them up on the portal. You can look at the geographic distribution. You can look at the rankings. So we have all that information available to answer your questions today. So if there are any questions on these slides, this meeting is now for you to dive in and start the refinement process and provide that feedback to CAC. And again, I will turn to Terry as a liaison and the 3 officers if there's anything else to add.
For me, I think our committee had a very good discussion on Monday, as Farhad mentioned, and came through with several projects to potentially add, as well as a few to talk to you about to see whether there was additional justification for those projects that we may not have in our toolkit at this point. Our purpose today is really to help give you some of the questions, I guess, that came up in our meeting, as well as to provide any feedback you might desire about kind of the current thinking of the committee. I will note that if I recall the number correctly, we were at, even with the added projects and no removals, except I think we did remove Houghton Road South as a draft working list. We still are pretty close to the 1.1 billion. I'd say a little less than 1.4 billion. One thing we have been discussing is the possibility of those projects that we really like that are surely going to be more than 1.1 billion now and are going to be much more perhaps than 1.4 billion once real live cost estimates are completed. May take the form of a proposed $1.1 billion package along with reserved projects, with the understanding that should the board elect to perhaps increase from a half cent to 6/10 or something like that, that there may be projects that we've already vetted that would be easily added, should that be the case. But certainly understanding that our charge at this point is to develop a plan somewhere in that $1.1 billion range. And project by project, I think, is a great way for us to go today, so that we can get kind of full discussion that we can take back to the CAC and let them digest, I think, what the consensus might be around this table, as well as what some of the concerns and or supporting information that we can collect today might be.
Okay, well, with that, I think we'll go ahead and dive in. Jeanette, if you want to pull up the portal and
I want to ask to say, just to be clear, I'm not trying to put two votes from Pima County at the table. Now that Carmine's here, I'm going to yield to him, but wanted just to comment that what we did hand out is, I think as some of you recall at the last TMC meeting, Carmine copied they have a stack bar graph. Some of that went out. He and Catherine and others have provided some granularity from the Pima County perspective. What you've got is really the data that's going to be informing the recommendations that Pima County is going to make. And now I'll shut up and Carmine will be the rep as well. We'll hope for that. And that he'll be our representative. I just wanted to be clear, we weren't trying to stick a second vote in on you.
And if I may add, so we did put the bar chart in your packet, and thanks for the suggestion. It was helpful. What you did is even more helpful. So hopefully when we get to it, we can kind of describe it to everyone. But just for the sake of discussion, we do want to clarify a few things and respond back to the CAC. So those were the items that were on the slides. We'll get back to that, but we really want to start at a higher level. So Jeanette, if you don't mind, higher level, we're at 41 projects currently. The total is roughly almost 4 billion. And so again, at your pleasure, we can go down the list and talk about the projects that did really well across the board. With all the exercises between the TMC and the CAC, there were roughly about 26 projects that did really well. And then there is a balance of those projects that had a varying level of input from various discussions. So that's where this comes in handy, hopefully, when we get down to that list of projects that some of them didn't perform as well when we went through the exercises with the CAC. So go ahead, Jeanette, dive in.
All right, thank you, Farhad. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. What you're seeing on the screen right now is that list of 41 projects that we've been referencing. So in this column right here, this column AF, I'm just going to start adding, this is where we're going to kind of document which projects are going to move forward on the list. So through the discussions that Hockey showed on the screen with those specific areas, the Southeast area, Northwest area, Drexel Road area. We'll get into those specific deeper dives in a moment. But what I wanted to start with is by showing you that group, that smaller group of projects that 25 projects. So these are the projects that scored really high with the CAC. And it seems like there's a lot of consensus behind these as a starting point for discussion and for sort of like that base of the list, like where can we begin? So you can see on this that some of the corridor segments are on here. Pieces of Drexel show up. Some of the projects from the southeast side, one of the Colossal Cave projects in particular shows up on this list. So that's a good place to start. And my suggestion is that we add these on the list for sake of discussion and then build from that and then see where we're if that's a good approach and you agree with that, we can go ahead with starting there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can. Evil. Okay, let's see.
Much as possible, yeah.
Have this.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. say that
I
again.
don't believe so.
Is this updated from the?
So you have the spreadsheet. This is just our analysis of, if you look at it from this perspective, when you actually run it and run the sorting, this is that product, but you have the entire list. It's part of that list that's in your packet.
That's PDF, right? This is the Excel.
That's right.
Yes,
Correct.
yes. So she's just analyzing it. We can analyze it any way you like, and then we can get a output almost immediately.
There's somebody that can send this again in the Excel
Right,
format
so that we can open.
so that I can open it up and do my own sorting,
Yes.
just while we're talking.
Sure, yeah, Josh will work with Crystal and get that. Yeah, Josh will get that. Okay,
Jeanette,
yes.
so some of these are maybes and some are yeses. I just wanted to point out that the CAC is asking for some feedback in order to continue discussion about those maybes, I guess, best way to put it. And so focusing on those at this point is the top 25 is maybe not quite accurate as far as the current CAC position, but those are, you're right that those received some support, those yellowed ones, the maybes. And I think some feedback on those would be really helpful. So discussion about.
Yeah, I would say that's probably a good starting point. So if we can go back to the discussion on Monday and your slides there and get feedback on those initially before we do anything else, that would be my
So
recommendation.
we could start with
Yeah.
the southeast.
So,
Sure.
so there were 5 in the southeast.
Yes, you pull that slide up, Crystal. Up, Crystal pulled the slide that shows those projects. On the portal.
So the CAC felt that those 5 should be added pending feedback from this group, with the understanding that that was just by adding those 5 was taking us above our goal of total cost for this segment of the plan. And understanding that some of them, some of those 5 may well have to be removed in order for us to get to that level. If that were the case, then I think we'd have, your feedback to help guide that.
Yes, and additionally, there was a lot of discussion about not doing all 5 of them, but doing either Marianne Cleveland Way or Colossal Cave Road. Those are the kind of things we wanted feedback from you on. We just, so like Pocky and Tom both said, we didn't say, let's add them and talk about them. We said we need more information from TMC members about the questions that Pocky brought up. If we're going to put some together and take the rest out, which is more regional, which is more needed. And there was talk about, do we want to spend money to go over the railroad tracks or have an at grade? There's a lot of things we don't know down on these particular projects. So we want to hear from you.
And one of the points that was discussed at CAC is just this slide, is potentially grouping these projects into 3 decisions. So the 2 segments that are Marianne Cleveland, perhaps that's one way to look at splitting those 5. The 2 pieces that are Colossal Cave, 395 and 3646, which are the pieces from I-10 to Marianne Cleveland, so sort of on the south. And then the other segment, 396, which is Marianne Cleveland to Camino Loma Alta. So they kind of all have their own unique characteristics and function differently, but it might make more sense to do those as corridors. So.
Okay, on that note, Patricia has her hand up. Patricia, do you have a question?
Yeah, I've had my hand raised since the beginning of the presentation, but thank you. I just wanted to clarify and provide a bit of context, having been at the CAC meeting on Monday. Just wanted to make sure that we're all aware of sort of like the nuance of the conversation that we had. And maybe if we could be reminded of the actual vote that the CAC did take on these projects. I believe it was like a 5-4 split with not all members voting for a few of them. So I think maybe Tom or Carolyn, if you have those numbers, that might be relevant to this discussion to share. And I also believe that we came away from our meeting on Monday with the understanding that we wouldn't just be adding these projects pending, feedback or approval from TMC, but that we would then go back to discussing and decide a vote again. So I just wanted to provide that little bit of context, having been there. I presume that's why I've been invited to this meeting. So just wanted to get that in there. Thanks.
Thank you. So again, as we discussed, that's the feedback we're hoping to take back to the CAC. So I don't know if it's helpful with this slide or with the map.
It's
And
more helpful with the map.
whichever one's more helpful. If we can go back to the map. And Jamie's online as well, and he was the one that was recommending some of these potentially either all or some of the actual combination of these projects. So I'll do my best. Feel free to chime in, please, since you were all there. As I recall, conversation was the goal of being able to provide access both from Houghton Road as well as from I-10 area. Is that a goal? And if it is, especially the one coming from I-10 with the grade separated crossing, that's definitely something that was discussed, as it would have to be a grade separated crossing most likely. And then if not both, then if only one, which one? And then ultimately the last section there, which potentially has the most need currently. But our folks can dive in as well and talk about, the need exists. Now the question is, to what extent are we willing to either move all 5 forward or a different combination of projects? Anything you want to add to that?
Only that we decided to take the tack, as I alluded to earlier, that we should add whatever projects we felt need to be added. At that time, see holistically what that master list looks like, both geographically and jurisdictionally, and any other way that we might want to look at the whole group before we decide on removing projects or moving them to our reserve list. So this exactly fits into that same sort of conversation.
Bit of information that you can kind of tell from the map is that project 395, there's actually 2 segments that consist of that project, and then there's project 3646 in the middle. And the reason for that is that that's where the jurisdiction boundaries lie. So the segment in the middle, 3646, is in the city of Tucson, the other 2 are in the county. I think for the purposes of a RTA plan, you'd want to do both of those instead of just one, leave them both.
So that was the first recommendation. Should those 2 projects be combined into one? And I think that conversation was at the CAC as well. So if there's any input on that, should those 2 projects coming from I-10 North should be combined as one project?
Mr. Chair, one more thing to add to the discussion. The reason that we took these projects and added them before your last meeting was because we saw that the Southeast didn't have really projects. And then, balancing that, which a lot of us don't know, are they regional projects? Or they say the county's responsibility or whatever. So there were a lot of arguments made both the ways, but that was why we added these, to have something in the Southeast. And these seem like the best ones to choose from.
All right, so we'll go from there. So feedback from jurisdictional sponsors, does that make sense to combine those 2 projects?
So it was helpful what Carolyn just indicated, how these projects came about from the CAC as additional considerations. And that I think is a fundamental question we have to address collectively is, are we seeking to disperse geographically? Or are we looking to identify the projects that have the greatest benefit from a regional perspective? And I don't say one's better than the other. I think it's important for us to have a little bit of that conversation from the overall standpoint in terms of the county recommended projects or requested projects. These in our prioritization fall lower than what the CAC ranked them as, and the introduction of them into this conversation about including them. I think if we're taking a geographical approach to it and trying to disperse projects down, what's being proposed here makes sense. That then raises the question for all of us is then what are we seeking to remove? And then are there other projects that the county as a sponsor ranked higher than these projects? And the answer to that is yes, there are. But I'd be interested in hearing from others on that perspective about geographical dispersion versus maybe highest benefit from individual projects.
I have a response to that, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry. Sorry.
It's a,
We're all stairs.
it's a roundtable discussion. Go ahead.
Response. I like the thought of regionalism being a first filter because ultimately we need to be concerned about this thing passing, right? The next filter for me is, does it mitigate traffic congestion? And so I think it's a factor of layers in my mind. The first layer would be, hey, we got to get this thing passed. And so does it make sense to have, projects in strategic areas, despite the fact that maybe it didn't score as high on our, on the quantitative side or quantitative side of it. And then we start talking about the quantitative stuff and making sure that we're trying to reach those other goals and mitigating traffic. That's just kind of how I'm.
So that's one approach, obviously, to start at a higher level. So I was trying to accommodate CAC's request for a response, but we can do that. We can go start at a higher level and then drill back down. So with that, let's go back to the 41.
Okay, let's see.
I might note also that to answer your question from my perspective, Carmine, the answer is yes. You ask, is it this or is it that? And I would have to say yes from the CAC perspective. Both of those are important. Although these projects, may have varying levels of scoring, when we start talking about the scoring versus the ranking by the CAC, there's a big nuance or several there, as well as looking at where the priorities are within each of the jurisdictions, where they rank their own projects. And those are all things that we're trying to take into account.
If I may, and I don't want to go into unnecessary detail on the graph that we handed out. We did this for our own purpose, and this was sort of the discussion that I had introduced at the last TMC meeting is where do these fall? And so as we're looking at projects, and so we talked a lot about Thornydale, and I misspoke at the last meeting. I said Thornydale was the county's #2 priority. It's #4, so I apologize for that. I want to correct that on the record. But if you just look at the graph and you look about a third of the way along the bottom line where the names are, right? Orange Grove Road #1, that ranked #1. That was #1 for us. And when you look at it, the Y at the very base there means TMC recommended it. You see the 1 is the county scoring ranking. The 46 is the CAC priority ranking. And then when you follow that stacked bar graph all the way up to the top, that was the CAC scoring ranking. So that's the evaluation that we're going through on the county side and saying, okay, what's the relative value when we talk about Colossal Cave Road #2, and it's highlighted about midway along that bottom line of the graph, right? Number 396, that was the county's #19. Now, it didn't take into account this geographical disbursement consideration. So that's what we're going through in our mind. And then Marianne Cleveland, number 476, that's also highlighted at the bottom farthest to the right. That was our number 14. So if I can go back to Thornydale, we've got Orange Grove, Valencia, right, where county priorities 1, 4, and 5. And yet then what's being proposed here is including Colossal Cave number 2, and then Marianne Cleveland, which were our 19 and 14 priority ranking. So that's just honestly where we sit right now. And, you know, I think we're all wondering if we walk through this sequentially and say, yes, that's in, then that means something else is not. And by the time we get to the end of the list, what are we doing, right? What are we going to do with those items we talked about last? So I just think a broader conversation might be more useful, trying to hone in on what the overall objective is. And I appreciate, you know, the acknowledgement that geographical disbursement is important, and I don't disagree with that. And if we're doing that, then we have to reorient ourselves in Pima County and say, even though we had a higher priority project on our list, in order to achieve more geographic equity, we're going to go ahead and support something else coming into that, you know, ranked list of or to be recommended projects.
Just a reminder to everyone that there were, I believe, 21 county projects that were proposed. And so when you say 19, that gives you some perspective about how low on that priority list it actually was.
And I just want to also state, because it's important, we have not taken this to our elected body. Our board hasn't weighed in on this. We did a similar exercise to the scoring ranking matrix, Tom, that was put together for CAC. So I've got that separately. I don't need to bore you with it, but we looked at categories and we assigned point values for safety, mobility, economic development, resiliency, connectivity, pavement condition, equity, environmental impact, and then how did it fall relative to RTA goals. So we tried to use some of the criteria that already has been established as we've built our way through this discussion and coming up with our ranking, but it's by no means final or definitive. It's just where we sit at this particular point in time. And I want to note that, because we may have a need for our board to give input or endorse the priority recommendations that staff has come up with to this point.
Thank you for going through that exercise with these goals. That's what we were hoping that everybody would do.
With that said, again, going back to the higher level discussion and the list of questions, we can look at the entire list, and then that's where the question comes in. You know, what should be kept, what can be removed. That's what really the CAC is looking for, a recommendation from this group, so they can look at it from that different perspective as well. So Jeanette, take us through the list, whatever works from the reporting perspective.
Yeah, so what I'm showing you in the portal right now is that list of 41. So this is really just to demonstrate that geographic representation. So we do have the southeast side, those 5 projects that we discussed, the projects that Carmine brought up, the Thornydale, 2 Inas, and then the opportunity to consider Orange Grove. And so, yes, it's up to this group to decide what is that balance going to be. Are we going to look at this strictly from a priority rank score, or are we going to balance that somehow? Knowing that it was important to the CAC to talk about that southeast side, and it seems like everybody here has a interest in making a determination on that. It probably would be good to decide what the group would like to do with those projects. Certified right there. One point that we did bring up to the CAC, and I know it's been important to the TMC as well, is to look at congestion and how congestion could play a factor into the discussion on these 5 segments. So you can see of the 3 kind of groupings that we came up with, the piece from Marion Cleveland to Camino Loma Alta does experience a high level of congestion. So that might be a factor, as well as there's some congestion from the I-10 to Marion Cleveland piece. And then, of course, at the very end of Marion Cleveland near Houghton Road, there's also some congestion there. I don't know if that helps. I know you had brought up congestion as a consideration. Yeah, are there any thoughts on how we want to look at 5?
I will say we received more input from the public in our kind of call to the audience process on this project than or on these projects than on any other that we've taken up. A lot of support in that area and a lot of concern that obviously we know the issues that the Vale area has tried from time to time to become incorporated and perhaps at some points feels less represented. And so they really organized and put together a letter campaign, I guess is the best way to put it.
So the question from the CAC was, should these 5 be included in the list for further consideration? So I think at a minimum, we can respond, should they be included for further consideration, or is there a strong argument for them not being included?
So can we look again, the projects that are clustered in here? I know 2 of them are in Pima County. Who is the sponsor, the proposer for the other?
See, it's Tucson is a segment in between. So there's from I-10 all the way up. It should be one project, but City of Tucson has a segment.
Mike, do you have any guidance and any feeling?
So I think the at least from where I sit, the bottom line is, I think John, you mentioned prioritization and then but then an understanding of realities of the place. Look at the map. Side is very sparse, not just here, but side on the other map. Look at the map. The side is very sparse. That's that. I don't mind telling you all that's positive. Just breathe my face. And again, the argue or outline the capacity issues on, congestion issues on that. But if we're looking for support, I think that our interest obviously is a segment of that. Support the reality of even a small segment, but it makes sense, right? So that's my reality for us. Priorities will ultimately have to be overlaid, as Janet said this 4 meetings ago. Ultimately, it's got to be overlaid on geographic representation. That's that. Unfortunately or fortunately, perspective has to be strange. We're talking about finite number, and we don't have what I would say up to date or accurate costs based on analysis from consultants. So what makes me nervous is before go down this path, we say yay or nay, come up to this magic number of 1.2. And we go back and do all the analysis and find we're 0.3 short because the cost, other things. We got to go back to the drawing. That makes me nervous in terms of the costs. And expectation. That's what this is. So I think it's a great idea to include it. That's what you're asking. But I still remain cautious. Of that, you know,
We're gonna, Jimmy had his hand up for a while. If you don't mind, I'll let.
Yeah, so the other thing to keep in mind, one piece that is important to us is tourism and economic development. We don't think belong. So Colossal Caves, put in that category of tourism. I was focused on there, but I'm not opposed to Colossal Caves. Just have to figure out is that constituents. It just doesn't sound that, or is it truly constituents? Value to conversations.
Okay, Jamie's online. Go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I just want to offer some perspective as a resident of the area and a CAC member and a person that used to work in that area. So I think the big issue here is, you know, I moved out here in 2013. For 10 years, I've just heard complaints about the railroad. And I think that's the primary cause of congestion. If you look at the congestion maps, it shows that segment, you know, we've got 2 master plan communities out here. You got 2,500 homes in the Rancho del Lago, and you've got another, 4,000 homes in Rocking Cay. And a lot of those people are heading south. They're not going across the Valencia area. They're heading south down Loma Alta, out to I-10. A lot of our residents, some are heading east into Tucson, but a vast number of them are working for, they're going to Benson. They're working in Fort Huachuca. So the need to go east and west are both pretty important. I guess my perspective, if we have to choose one or the other, if I put my old hat on as a fire chief, to drive 3 miles up the freeway, go 2 miles up Houghton, and then drive 3 miles back Marion Cleveland to get those residents in that Rincon Valley CDP. That doesn't work so well when you have a heart attack, right? You can't take a 20-minute diversion. Congestion wise, just so you guys understand the area, there's 2 schools along Colossal Cave that backs up considerably, which I think causes a secondary congestion on that Colossal Cave segment from Marion, Cleveland to Loma Alta. I think the biggest need out here, the thing that I hear the most complaint is we need to get over the railroad tracks. That causes the congestion. You know, that's the biggest problem. If we want to go to life safety, that's probably the biggest problem for the Vail area. You know, if you can't get it, there's 69 trains now going through this segment, this area. These trains are up to 2.5 miles long, and they slow down considerably. The trains going into town are pretty fast. They're about 4-minute wait time. Again, if you're having a heart attack, 4 minutes is a long time. But the ones heading to the east, they have to slow down because of a big turn. Those are 10, 12 minutes. Again, that's the biggest complaint. So I think this segment, the one segment from basically from Marion, Cleveland to I-10, if we combine those with that small piece that the city of Tucson has, that would really make a lot of the voters, I believe, out in the Vail area happy. There's about 19,000 people north of that would be served by this road segment. And the numbers are only going to get bigger. If you had to prioritize, I got to tell you, that'd probably be the #1 concern. The other ones are always nice, right? Especially at the Loma Alta. As Rocking Cay gets developed, I think Loma Alta is going to be overloaded soon too. So both of those, I mean, those Colossal Cave segments, I guess I would put as this piece would be my #1 priority. The piece from, you know, the Colossal Cave, from basically Colossal Cave, the Marianne Cleveland segment up to Camino Loma Alta. Those are, that, if you're gonna ask what's gonna get your biggest bang for the buck, it would be this piece. So I guess that I'm trying to make just to give you some more information as you make your decision. This piece does rank what, number 8 from the county, across railroad tracks. And so it does have a high ranking by the sponsor. So I think this is the gateway, right, to the Colossal Cave itself from tourism perspective. A lot of people take that's the gateway to Saguaro National Park if people are coming from the east. So I think this is a pretty important project. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So Carmine, if you don't mind. So thanks for doing that, Jeanette. So basically, it would be combining the two projects from I-10 North and then the last leg as one project. Go ahead.
Or that makes a lot of sense. I mean, what Jamie offered was very insightful as to what happens there on a regular basis from multiple perspectives. So I appreciate that, Jamie. And that seems to be the greatest value for us to continue to consider. If I understand correctly, we're saying, let's keep it on the list for consideration. And it's those 3 Colossal Cave segments, right? We're gonna drop from consideration Marianne Cleveland, and we're going to focus on then I-10 all the way to Camino Loma Alta, correct, on Colossal Cave. And yes, I think that makes sense. The thing that I want to point out, right, because the county went through this on our RTA project for Sunset Road, you will not get approval for an at-grade crossing at the railroad. So that is clear from the efforts we went through, both with the railroad and the Corporation Commission. So if we're going with that segment, we're planning to span the railroad.
I believe that's the scope in the proposal, to have a grade separated crossing.
That's what the budget right now includes.
I do have a question for the city as to perhaps why those segments of Colossal Cave and Marianne Cleveland, for that matter, that are in the city had low priorities. They were number 25 and number 20, I think.
So I'll get to that in a second. I just wanted to confirm, you didn't ask the question, does the budget include the GSI?
That's what yes.
Yes, it does. Okay. I didn't hear the answer. So I'm going to have Sam jump up and chat a little bit about it. Keep in mind that when you look at the goals, the congestion and some of the challenges you've got are just pretty great across the system. And the ADTs on this particular segment don't rise at ground level. But having said that, I'm not opposed at all to having a conversation around it, because I think points already been made to report some percent.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Just chatting with our staff about these projects. So we'll start with Colossal Cave first. Our priority rankings were mostly based on our Move Tucson Mobility Master Plan that we conducted. And so that's where a lot of our priority rankings came from, that took into account safety, equity, accessibility. So as you know, there's not much out there in Colossal Cave in terms of the city's portion, but we did acknowledge that it's a bottleneck if the county did both sections, which I'll come back to in just a second. Similar with Mac Way, again, it didn't rank very high when you take a look at our Move Tucson Mobility Master Plan. We definitely identify the need for improvements out there, but just in terms of all the other projects we had on the list, it wasn't one of our higher ranking projects. I do want to come back to the conversation about Marianne Cleveland Way and Colossal Cave in terms of this whole area. I was part of the subgroup that discussed this TMC workshop. And one of the things that we were looking at is regionally significant projects, and in taking a look at what both the county had planned in this area as well as the city, it did seem to make sense to include these as a potential priority if we were going to move forward, just because of the continuity of both Marianne Cleveland Way and Colossal Cave. As you've heard some of the conversation today, if the county were to do Colossal Cave on that north segment there, it wouldn't make sense for the city not to do that small piece. And it's a pretty low dollar amount. I think it was originally $6 million with some of the inflated costs we took a look at. It's more like 9 million. However, the segment on Macway is a pretty significant project. I think our latest cost estimate to widen that to 4 lanes is around $50 million. But again, in terms of continuity and partnering with the county, it did make sense to include those together, move them forward as a TMC priority out of the workshop. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you for that. If everybody agrees, that's a good feedback back to the CAC that it makes sense to combine those 3 projects and keep them on the list for further discussion. All right, thank you. So we can jump up to Drexel is the easy one. Let's talk about Drexel. Drexel, as you all recall, there are multiple segments. The conversation at the CAC level was that let's complete the corridor. There was one segment that didn't rank as well, but the recommendation is to include that segment to complete the corridor. And I assume that you all would agree with that. If not, here's the opportunity to provide feedback to the CAC. And that's the segment we're talking about, right?
The county segment, which is the furthest piece to the west.
Yeah. Cardinal to Mission.
Drexel Cardinal.
So hopefully everybody agrees that if we're going to do a corridor, we should complete the corridor. Or is that reasonable feedback back to the CAC to include it? Okay. All right. So that's
the easy one.
That's the easy one. And then we can move up to Thornydale, Ina, and Orange Grove discussion. Again, those were definitely fruitful discussions. Orange Grove was added to the mix as an alternative. So looking at Ina, there were 2 segments of Ina. The segment on the east, there was a recommendation instead of doing the segment on the east, perhaps look at Orange Grove as an alternative. So keep the segment to the west, and then instead of a segment to the east, look at Orange Grove as an alternative. So if you have those projects, if you want to pull those up.
Sure. Yeah.
Part of the conversation had to do with whether Orange Grove is at a much lower level of completion, let's call it, than Ina, which has been it's been many years now since it was widened, but it does have a more fully developed cross section than Orange Grove. And the idea being that perhaps Orange Grove should have a little bit higher priority.
That's correct. So what we're seeing here are the 2 proposed Ina Road projects. So the interstate to the CDO Wash, which was a project submitted by Marana, and then the other piece is the CDO Wash, essentially to the intersection at Ina and Northville. The line doesn't appear to go all the way to the intersection because the intersection, of course, has already been built. But yeah, it warrants discussion on the segment of Ina. The county segment has a pretty big price tag, and the CAC thought that Orange Grove, that project might be a good consideration. Also because it serves the same area, but also it was a higher scoring project from the jurisdictional sponsor. Thornydale, there was discussion on there's nothing, just overall representation.
So let me clarify this again. So on the current list, there are 2 segments of Ina. So the question that was raised was, instead of doing the segment on the east, should we consider Orange Grove? Orange Grove currently is not on the list. So it was just a question.
When you say on the east, Farhad, you're talking
pull up the
about,
limits, yeah.
you're talking about Camino de la Tierra to
Oracle, yes. Yeah, if you don't mind, pull up that segment. Here's the segment on the screen. So the question was raised, instead of doing that segment, should we do Oracle? Could you please pull up, or I'm sorry, Orange Grove, could you please pull up Orange Grove? So that was just a question. It's not on the list currently.
So this
There
is
you go.
the Orange Grove project, Orange Grove 1, that was brought into consideration. Orange Grove 2 goes from Oracle to Skyline, and that wasn't one of the priorities brought up by the committee. So this is,
So what you have under your list are the two INA segments.
One from the county and one from the.
Correct. Correct.
that would complete the corridor from the interstate all the way to Oracle.
So another reason, and I believe Dale was the individual that brought that up, and Brian has his hand up. So I'll Brian, why don't you go first, and then I'll remind everybody what Dale brought up. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you. And I'd like to just bring perspective as Jamie did. I live on the northwest side of town, work on the northwest side of town, so I travel these roads quite a bit. Obviously, as a resident and employee of the northwest side, it would obviously be great to have both of these done. But I have different perspectives looking at these. And the biggest one is when you look at Orange Grove, when you travel down Orange Grove, you do get that bottlenecking roughly from La Cholla to Oracle, where you drop down to one lane each direction. And actually from Oracle all the way to the interstate, while there's a center turn lane, it's not a divided median. So there are safety applications there that I think would be good, but Orange Grove is also largely residential, where when you look at Ina Road going from the interstate, especially over to Oracle, it is heavy commercial along that route, and you get significant congestion. Some of this, I believe, technology could be a factor to congestion. I know very well that if I get off the interstate and head east, that if I hit the first red light, then I'm going to hit every single red light heading east because of the timing. But there just is more traffic due to the commercial along Ina Road. And my concern is you won't get enough people detouring to Orange Grove simply because their destination, unless they're just trying to bypass all of that and connect to Skyline, they still have a need to go to Ina for the commercial that's along that route. So that's my input.
Thank you, Brian. And you all helped me with what Dale's perspective was. Dale is one of our members on the CAC, and he felt that there was probably lack of any benefits in that area. So that was the reason he brought that up, that it could be an alternative, mainly because there were no projects in that area.
Right.
Yeah, so from the county's perspective, Orange Grove #1, so that segment from Oracle to La Cholla, that was our #1 priority project. So we would agree that should be continued for consideration and was ranked by us above that Ina Road segment.
I will say, so when we're talking about Orange Grove, we're talking La Cholla to Oracle, but there's also a segment of it from La Cholla to La Cañada that goes down to 3 lanes as well. That also provides quite a bottleneck, and I don't know whether or not that should be included or not. I will say, to Brian's point, and I don't have as much to say about the county's portion, but with regard to Marana's portion on Ina Road, I will tell you that the congestion on Ina Road between I-10 and say Shannon is very epic, to the point that it does get difficult to maneuver emergency vehicles through it. There may be an argument that, and that will certainly defer to the county's position on Ina Road from Camino de la Tierra to Oracle versus Orange Grove as being a higher priority. I can certainly understand their perspective on that as well. So, but just from Marana's perspective, relative to Ina Road, highly traveled interconnect between the far northeast side all the way to I-10 and so I think that's an important project on the list.
My take on the discussion from the CAC was that the Marana portion was an important segment, but that perhaps the Orange Grove roads, both projects that we talked about just now, would be a better selection than the county's Ina Road portion. So just trying to lay it out as far as how the committee was parsing it at the time.
If we look at opportunities, right, to really maybe amplify benefit, the Orange Grove segment, both, right, the portion that the county put forward and then the piece, to the west of that makes sense, right, for continuity along that corridor. If we're going to consider one, that we consider both of them.
And that was my point. We talked earlier about, if we're going to do a corridor, we might as well do the whole corridor relative to Drexel. It makes absolutely zero sense to me. And I think people driving that road would be scratching their heads, wondering why in the world did they put all this money into Orange Grove from Oracle to La Choya and then pinch it back down to 2 lanes for this half-a-mile segment.
I'm certainly supportive of bringing the two together. I think that makes good partnership sense and good planning. I also wonder if improvements on Orange Grove or Ina aren't necessarily mutually exclusive in terms of benefit. I mean, if we were to conduct this work, these improvements on Orange Grove, is it feasible or reasonable to expect that that's going to help alleviate some of the congestion on Ina? So I'm just putting that out there a little bit.
I don't think, honestly, I don't think it will relieve it significantly. And going back to Brian's point, people travel Ina Road because of where they live in the far northeast side to get to I-10. And other people that are on Ina Road are there specifically for the commercial elements that are on Ina Road. Does that mean they couldn't divert to Orange Grove and take that if it's less congested, perhaps? So
that's good feedback. We'll provide that feedback to the CAC, and extending the limits would be part of that feedback. All right, thank you. So the last one from the CAC discussion was Thornydale Road. And again, I think we talked briefly about that last time. Carmine brought it up again. I think there's a recognition that there is a need. There was some conversation about do you need the entire extent of the road to be improved to 4 lanes or not. I think those are things that can be addressed later on in the process, but recognition that it is an important segment and it should be considered, it should be included. But if there's any comments on the cross-section and all that, I'll leave it up to you all, but that's something that we don't need to get into the weeds today, but we can do it later if it's on the list.
I agree. We can come back to those details. County feels strongly that it be included.
and the town of Marana would strongly support that as well. We have a very small segment of Thornydale that is in that portion, probably less than half a mile. So, and I think the details relative to what you were speaking of, Farhad, and supported by the county here is that we can figure out the details, whether it needs to be 2 lanes with the center left turn lane for a portion of it and widen to 4 lanes with medians that determined through traffic studies.
We'll work through those. Thank you. So that answers all the 9.
So I just wanted to point out on this Thornydale discussion that we made note of the county's, I think, kind of standard standard wording of each of their projects that should TDM or ITS or any other technologies or changing conditions dictated that the proposed number of lanes may be adjusted at the time of design. And that's something that the committee was discussed for a bit, particularly thinking about a 3-lane section to the north and you know, a 4-lane divided to the south. I will also say that that was a project that it was noted with the apparent recurrence of the listing of the pygmy owl, that there be some fairly significant environmental issues with the design and completion of those projects.
Yes, it did bring back memories. This discussion of Thornydale Road the last time it was widened, and there was quite an outcry. And as I recall, the director of transportation was fired over that, and because of the way it was done, and it began the process to adopt environmentally sensitive roadway designs guidelines in the county. So yeah, it brought back a lot of memories from the early days of my job.
Were those good memories, Carolyn?
No.
Carolyn called them memories. I think they were more like this one thing.
It's going.
But I think to the point, we've learned a lot along the way. I mean, the environmentally sensitive, you know, roadway design manual, that was one of them. But I think we have a different relationship today with respect to the environmental sensitivities than we did in the past. So, I mean, we are in lockstep with you on trying to achieve both objectives, right? Whatever they may be, you know, the environmental considerations as well as whatever the functional goals or outcomes we're trying to achieve. So I note that, right? We'll have to work through that. Absolutely. I think we know the challenges just from you know, mobility standpoint in that area of the county, and we'll have to work diligently with all parties in order to get to the right design outcome.
I assume you're speaking for Marana's segment too. But I do want to throw something in from our discussion the other day, and it's not just about Thornydale. There's been a little bit of frustration that we're just dealing with road widenings, extra lanes, and not able to fold in the transit, you know, public transit portion of it, because it's, you know, we're doing these in steps. So that was a lot of the discussion about making sure that when we're looking at congestion, we're also planning for transit. And so there was a sense at our committee that we reserve the right to reconsider these after we've had the full transit discussion and what's going to be going on, because some of these areas in the county, and we've got the ex-planning director on our CAC too, talked about when we were up planning a lot of this area, that it would attract public transit, and it hasn't really done that yet. So just keep that, you know, keep that thought. And we do have a transit subcommittee, and we're going to be starting to meet here pretty soon, and we go through, you know, finish this part of the process. But it's been kind of a chicken and the egg with some of the categoricals and the road named projects at our committee levels. So look forward to continuing through all of it.
All right, thank you. And so again, really appreciate the conversation. I think we accomplished our task of responding back to the CAC on the 9 projects. Thank you for that. So now we really can go back and dive deep into the list of 41 projects or 40 projects and talk about why some of these projects didn't perform as well, which is, I think, back to what Carmine was hoping to go back to. I'm sorry. Oh, that one, they already recommended to remove that. I don't think they were looking for input from you, but you're more than welcome. This is the Alton Road section. The recommendation from the CAC was to remove it from the list. It's already removed from your list of 41, but you're more than welcome to provide feedback if you like. But having said that, we can go back to the portal and really talk about why some of these projects didn't perform as well. And maybe that's where Carmine, you can dive into your chart and maybe compare the difference.
And
I'm sorry, just as an alternative, there's a couple of other projects that we had talked about needing input from the TMC in order to make decisions about perhaps removing.
Oh.
These are the ones that we thought
I got you.
that in some corners were called controversial. I think we
Sure.
felt like that probably wasn't the best description of them, but those two projects, the Sonoran Corridor and the BRT project, the main BRT project from Tucson, were ones where we thought there was either a conflict or a concern that could be impactful to voters and or to TMC members having perhaps different opinions about the project. So would it be
Sure.
okay if we
Yeah,
talk
of course. Thank you. Thanks for reminding me of that. So Sonoran Corridor is the easier one. Let's talk about that. I think the feedback from not the entire committee, but some of the folks was that because it's only for right-of-way purchase only, it may not be as exciting of a project on the ballot. And recognizing the timeline, how long it may even take to identify segments to be constructed. Other than that, there was, I think, some perspective about, is it potentially tied to I-11, just perspective? And other than that, remind me, officers, CAC officers, was there any other points? So potentially being tied to I-11 as a perspective. And do we want to set aside $20 million just for purchasing right away, not really having the full understanding of when the project potentially could go to construction? Those were the only issues they raised, right?
Yeah, there was one more, but I do want to say that we did talk about it being connected with I-11, but that was more in the context of the bonds when we were working on those two Pima County bonds. And I think they've been pretty well bifurcated at this point, because I had brought that up. The other thing that we were talking about, because there are definitely some very strong proponents of Sonoran Corridor, was it's a federal project. That was the timeline of going through the tier 2 of the EIS. But the question that was brought up was, or actually the issue that was brought up was, it's going to be mostly federal funds if it does go through the process, and there's going to be a local match. And that this $20 million is for land acquisition, but it's not going to cover all of the land acquisition. It's also tied a lot of it to state trust land, which is always a big question mark if you're going to be able to acquire that. And also if the land acquisition only would be considered a match for the road itself. So there was a lot of questions like that I don't know if we can answer right now, but that's the big one. The guy, Kevin, that brought it up in the first place was more about the timeline than the controversy involved here.
Yeah, and I think there was a difference of opinion on how it might be perceived by the public. So I think that's really the question that's being raised. Shane, if you don't mind, go ahead. And then I had somebody's hand up, but I don't anymore. Go ahead.
Thank you. I spent quite a bit of time in my former life up in the Phoenix Valley, and realizing how long it takes for a region to plan and actually construct a corridor like this. All we're doing is pushing something down the road, and it's only going to get more and more expensive, and it's going to be more problematic to acquire that right of way the longer we go, because development is going to continue to happen. Whether or not I-11, I mean, even in our jurisdiction, we don't even know where I-11 is going to really intersect I-19. And so, at least from our perspective, this corridor is not inextricably, tied to the I-11. It's a regional corridor meant to relieve traffic and allow growth to occur. And if you look at the pains and struggles of what happened in the Phoenix area with 202 and 303 and 101, I don't know why this group in the responsibilities that we have as a region, I don't know why we would decide not to put $20 million to acquire right away on this corridor. It's just good planning. It's not a huge ticket item when you look at the whole of it. And it does set the stage for success down the road whenever that thing is constructed. So I think it would be a mistake to not move forward with this. I don't think it's even a chink in the armor, when what we're really trying to accomplish as a region. And I think it's poor planning if we don't move forward with it. So that's my 2 cents as an agency. Thank you.
Any other comment?
Yeah, just a couple of points. One, I know it's sponsored by Pima County, but this truly is a regional infrastructure improvement, and the region has been involved all throughout the Tier 1 environmental impact study, and a lot of good collaboration has happened there. And just from that standpoint, I feel that it warrants further consideration, keeping it on the list. To the point about Sonoran Corridor and I-11, board and the county has been, behind the Sonoran Corridor since the inception of the concept. That's not been the case on I-11. So the board has taken action on 2 different occasions, adopting a resolution in opposition of I-11. So from the county's perspective, we're very clear on how those 2 are not related to one another and our positions on them. I think because preliminary work has begun on the Tier 2, it would be beneficial to have ADOT and FHWA come in and present to the TMC at a minimum, if not, the regional council and the RTA board, just to get an update on where things are, because this will continue to be a theme of conversation as we try to hone in on a final list of roadways. So being equipped with the most current information on where things stand, I think is helpful. And I think to Shane's point, this is a generational improvement, and we have to stay, I believe, diligent in seeking to advance it successfully. And if we don't include it as part of this package, and I understand the jury's still out on whether it'll be in or not, I don't know how we get there, quite honestly. So I think it's important to keep on the list for consideration and discussion, and to receive input on what the current state of the planning process is, the study process is, and the timeline going forward.
I would also, just real quick, I would also add that by committing ourselves to this investment on this corridor, I think that does in fact open up opportunities to bring federal dollars to the table. Absent of that, I think it makes our argument incredibly difficult. So thanks.
Agreed. Well, we'll convey that. And it's similar. Thanks for saying that. It's similar to what we did on Bras Aviation. In the current RTA plan, there's RTA dollars set aside for right-of-way purchase, and it does count as match towards federal dollars. So yes, all right, we'll convey that on corridor if there's no other comments on that.
The comment I've got, I agree that I think what might get folks riled up is designated specifically for right-of-way acquisition. I think it would be exploring that corridor to right-of-way acquisition. Local match, I think could better describe what that is, as opposed to just going to go buy land that's specific. And then it gives us flexibility to, when we do have an opportunity potentially for federal money to have it in the match, use it that way, so it doesn't necessarily have to be specifically right away acquisition. So that's all. I thought just the scope or name maybe could help.
Yeah, we'll explore that with ADOT. So as Carmine just mentioned, ADOT is moving into Tier 2 studies. So that's funded by the state, which is definitely a good step forward. So yes, we'll discuss that with ADOT as well and see how we can change the description as needed. All right, thank you all. So the next one was going back to the study, which was a high capacity transit study. At least one of the CAC members brought up some concerns by some Tucson residents. I believe there was some conversation there, and no input from Airport Authority yet. So they wanted more input. Anything else to add to that?
kind of a local point was made that the Fox Theater renovation will have some impacts kind of at one terminus of the route, parent terminus. And, to explore that, to see whether that's good or bad for such a study. And then also in general, is there a selected route or is there route flexibility that might help alleviate South Tucson's citizens' concerns that were voiced recently?
And so I would just say addition, I'm sorry, just that we also wanted to hear answers to those questions from the city, because this was a City of Tucson project with pieces going through South Tucson. So I just echo what Tom said.
So I'll start off and then I'll tap Sam. So first of all, I think Carolyn made the comment earlier about the difficulty in approaching this thing as opposed to parallel with the opportunities for understanding how transit, safety, all the other pieces, right, fall into this. This is a great example of that. And I would suggest to you that maybe this belongs on the transit side. Okay, that could be a conversation about that. But ultimately, I think that the spirit of this is to tackle and talk about in terms of goals of for congestion and providing opportunities and so forth. Have heard some of the concerns that have been voiced by the city of South Tucson. Obviously, here so they can help out, but I think there is flexibility. I think that's a conversation we have. If you look at magnitude of what we're looking for in terms of that congestion, this makes total sense. Now, does it have to go that exact alignment? Is that South Tucson? Is all the things that should be flexible.
Is the scope of this project study only, or is it?
Yeah, I'm gonna get to that. So there's two pieces to this, in my opinion. One is the concept of this corridor, but we're also having conversations of the corridor to the north along Oracle and components of that. So the discussion, I think, is important for us to, okay, how do we look at this opportunity for I'll use the term mass transit, lack of better terms, that's all. And really start to hone in on an expansion of that concept beyond just the core of the town. So the short answer is, I think what's in the thought was planning and make it a local match. And make it a local match for some future that we'll have. But again, going back to the Cinnamon corridor, I think that's a function of what the solid look like. So building in as much flexibility as possible is important. So I would absolutely advocate, and with that understanding that this is a broader conversation to potentially include part of the transit discussion. And the last thing I'll say about that component is, as we look at the chemistry of the road name projects and the categoricals, we have to recognize that projects like this may fall in both. So there needs to be flexibility and understanding as we go forward, because ultimately the conversation, I think, then becomes too finite to say, well, that's here, so we draw a line around it, and not over here. Sam, if you have anything to add, how about it?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ortega, and I'd love to answer those questions for you and add a little bit more context to why these routes were selected. So the city is currently undertaking a federal grant from the FTA to study an equitable transit-oriented development corridor. In fact, two corridors, one being that north leg along Oracle, the other being the south leg along 6th Avenue and down to the airport. They're study corridors in that they actually radiate out beyond those roadways. And so there has not, a couple things is that we haven't selected, that study does not suggest a selected transit technology in terms of BRT or streetcar. It just takes a look at the opportunities for equitable transit oriented development, specifically taking a look at the land use planning policies associated with future high capacity transit. So while the 6th Avenue route is shown on here, it's by no means the selected preferred alternative for future high capacity transit. However, we do identify that there are a lot of opportunities along South 6th Avenue. That is some of our highest route ridership in that area. You did mention the city of South Tucson. Myself and Liz Morales, the Housing and Community Development Director, presented to the new council for city of South Tucson and provided some context in that study, really taking a look at the land use planning opportunities specifically related to affordable housing. And so while we definitely heard some opposition at that meeting regarding the study, I think that what we took away from that meeting is that there will be continued conversations with the city of South Tucson about how we can work together, and ultimately whatever is decided on, that they are part of that conversation and that we are addressing their concerns appropriately. I think that's all I have to add. Thank you for the opportunity. Yes, Chairman.
Things our understanding from our committee that brought it up, committee member, was that it's the argument against was gentrification. That argument. Okay, so, and the question I have is the why is not the other segment that goes up to Honotodai in, is that already the study already funded, or why isn't it all just one corridor in this proposal?
Yeah, so we, great question. So as part of the Equitable Transit Origin Development Project, it is all one study area. It's a 15-mile study area from the airport to Honotodai. We did submit them as two different projects. I'm going to look to my team here. Is there a reason why we split them into two projects?
Because they were broken out in the initial HCT study that was done in 2019 in partnership with PAG and the city. So we were looking at different combinations of technologies and route alignments. And that has different projects. So we did separate out the north end of it. Here in the southern tier, both of which were submitted.
And so I think what that presents is an opportunity that there could be a mixture of technologies, whether that is BRT or streetcar extension, on the two different alignments. And so that's why they were submitted again as two separate projects, with the understanding though that this is part of our transit system, part of our high capacity transit system for the region, not just the city of Tucson.
I'm going to add to that. Mayor and council will be chatting about those exact items here pretty quick, like today. And so I'm expecting that there'll be some suggestions or recommendations to come back from that. Again, I think to the points that both of you made, the pieces that are important are how this fits into categorical. We have a conversation on the transit piece, or is it a project? So start looking at this holistically. I think you're going to see both segments back on how those, what the final configuration of where they fall. Still
The only thing I'd add to that is that there were other named projects that were submitted that seemed to be more appropriate and categorical for transit. And one of the discussions, we haven't really started it, I think it was brought up here one time too, is to have, like we did with the streetcar, if there are particular projects that are high priority to the city or whoever that are categorical, should there be some named projects and categorical so they don't just end up competing with all of the other, just a big pot of money that's left to a committee after the election, kind of.
Yeah, and just
might get dropped if that's.
yeah. So for everyone's benefit, and you just mentioned that the streetcar was a transit project and it was a named project as well. So that's really the difference is which projects are actually going to be named on the ballot And it doesn't matter whether it's a roadway project or a transit project, as long as the board decides it's a named project, it'll be on the ballot as a named project. All right, so with that, thank you. We'll provide that feedback. Again, hopefully CAC folks are satisfied. At least we've tried to answer those questions from the last meeting. We have sufficient input to go back to the next CAC meeting. So with that, we can dive into other items. If anybody needs a break, we can take a short break, but then we'll dive into the list. And again, it's really up to you all, but at some point we need to look at some of the projects and recognize that they may not rise to the level of being included. So let's think about that and have that conversation when we come back.
Farhan, could I just ask if there's any, we have 3 other members on the, is anybody, can I ask if any of the other 3 members have any final comments?
Nobody has their hand up, but please, if you have any questions, raise your hand. No hands. So if you don't mind, let's come back right at 10:05. Take a short recess.
And
Sure, we got a quorum in the room. We do not have a quorum in the room, so let's wait for a second. I think Mike is up there.
The what?
Quorum, thank you again. Thanks for. Let's call the meeting back to order. So thank you for your participation this morning. I appreciate your feedback that we're going to provide back to the CAC at their next meeting. For this segment of the meeting, and unfortunately, we're not going to have our quorum for too long. So hopefully we can stay hopefully on topic as much as possible. We lost one of our members that was online, had to leave, and then one of our CAC representatives online had to leave. But hopefully we'll maintain quorum as long as we can. And then if we lose quorum, then we'll have to come back another day. So with that, let's dive into this segment of the conversation. And our hope, again, would be to provide feedback to the CAC on the list of 40 projects. And I would submit to you, it's going to be a challenge for them. So they really need your help. They need input from you. If we don't provide input, it's going to be more of, we don't know which direction we need to go. So it would be really helpful if you're willing to offer some feedback to them. So with that list of 40, I would start by asking the question, is there anything on that list that you all believe is worthy of a conversation, that it may not be as much of a priority and it maybe needs to be reconsidered? So let's start with that. Carmine.
Farhad, can I just take a moment? There's one project that the county submitted that we feel warrants consideration, and in the context of what we've been talking about with corridors and continuity. So 3642 is Valencia Road from Mission to Camino de Oeste, and that currently is not in the list of recommended consideration, and we feel that it should be. So Jeanette, if you're able to go to that segment, but basically the county and RTA have invested in that Valencia Road corridor from I-19 to Ajo. And so 76 million has been invested in improving that corridor, mobility along that corridor. So the piece from Mission to Camino de Oeste is a segment that currently is over capacity. So 39,000 ADT, right, on a capacity of 35, and it's only going to continue worsening. So we have had specific discussion with our Board of Supervisors on this segment. They have directed us to move forward with design on that roadway segment using impact fees of the county, and we are beginning that process. We have not identified the construction dollars for that, and I'd like to just ask that this be added to a list of additional possible consideration when we talk about the corridor continuity and just the demands that are on that roadway and the abilities to improve it, not only from a congestion standpoint, but from a mobility standpoint for pedestrians and cyclists, as well as transit. I think that this warrants consideration.
Appreciate that. Thank you. We'll ask that question and discuss it at the next CAC meeting. All right.
I'm sorry, Carmen, is that a high transit use corridor as well, did you say, or this would help get transit.
So bus transit, there is bus service, transit service along that route, but certainly it can use improvement in terms of safety from the multi modes of use along that segment. A lot of trips take place on that roadway, vehicular trips that put at risk then pedestrians and cyclists. And if we can further enhance the ability to incorporate alternate mode means, we would consider doing that.
Yeah, be happy to. We'll make sure we provide the details and ask them to look at it again. All right, so Jeanette, if you don't mind, I think that really the easiest way to do this is to look at some of the projects that didn't perform as well. When you look at the composite feedback from the TMC as well as the CAC exercises. And again, I know this is probably challenging for everybody in the room as well, but is there anything on that list of projects that you consider that may not be as much of a priority as we think it might be at this point, and any reasons for it not to? So is this your list?
These were the priorities, so there's.
Yeah, so we're looking for the ones that didn't perform well across the board between the TMC, CAC, scoring, and I think this is the list, right? All right, let's just go right down the list. Can you make it a little bit larger?
Did you? This is the one that performed well. So we'll pull up.
Yeah, the one that did not perform well, we're looking for. Is this it?
No.
Okay. Anyway, just as we pull that up, for various reasons, obviously we can explore the reasoning. They did not perform as well, but they're still on the list, so that's worthy of another look.
So what we just did there is of the CAC score, and the CAC score was an exercise that looked to align the 10 goals that the CAC had adopted to the best available data and performance measures. 75, so of the 10 goals, each goal was assigned 10 points. So a total of 100 points. 75 of those points were from data and metrics that we had. 25 of those points came through kind of a survey of CAC members on how well they, in reading the project, how well they felt it addressed the goals. So it is a little bit of a blend of purely performance driven, data driven, and then a portion was an interpretation by the CAC members of how well they felt the project addressed the goal. So what just happened to get to this list of how many is this? I believe 11 was we looked at the projects that are in that group of 41 that fell outside of that kind of that top performing CAC scores, and so that's in part. So that's what you're seeing with this list. And one thing that we haven't talked through is that geographic distribution at a jurisdiction view with this list, Farhad. And so but just because previously we were thinking of kind of considering, so there are some projects in here that for the reason didn't score well through that evaluation tool. Some of them are because they're brand new facilities, or they're that don't have performance data to assess, like La Valita is predominantly the majority of that is in the facility. So there are some caveats to think through with this. But these are some of the ones that didn't make that initial CAC evaluation score cutoff of 1.1 billion projects. When you sort the ranking and you go down to where do we hit that 1.1 billion, these are the ones that fall just outside of it.
Josh, I would like to add that you can see that there's some vastly different rankings, if you go by the scoring tool that we developed or the priority exercise that we went through. Remember that the priority exercise was high, medium, and low priority for each of the projects. And we had close to 75% of the committee that participated in that. And I have felt more comfortable with that one than with the other, simply because we had twice as many people actually fill those rankings out. And so we have those CAC scores, which are worth looking at for sure. But I want to point out that there are probably some other functional reasons why they don't align in all cases extremely well with the priority ranking exercise.
I'd like a clarification question regarding the ADOT projects. So the total cost for those 3 projects, is that assuming that they're completely funded by RTA Next with no contribution from ADOT, or?
Sure. If you recall, we had this conversation at the last TMC meeting as well. ADOT is willing to go back and take a look at the project costs, and is going to ask. If you recall, at the last meeting, we were looking at relative to the current RTA plan, what was a reasonable RTA portion versus regional dollars. So they're going to come back with a revised ask on that, but currently it is the total cost of the project.
Can you hear me okay? So
Yeah.
there was a comment that I couldn't be heard. Was this thing on? Can you hear me okay? You don't hear the mic? I didn't touch
It was a text from people that was watching on.
Can you hear it now? Can you hear me now?
Do you have a different mic? Just switch the mic.
Not worried. I'm not worried, but
Everyone else.
everybody else. I have to be careful what I say. So, I'm curious as to why ADOT's not here today, because I think that ADOT is a key part in this discussion.
Just for clarification,
Well, let me finish.
Mark was here, but he had to leave.
Okay, well, let me finish. And so I think that the conversation was really about how we analyze the value of those regional projects as ADOT projects on a regional basis. And from my perspective, if there's an interchange improvement like a Keno or a Tangerine or wherever it is, those are obviously extremely important to the region. And they shouldn't be necessarily discounted as an ADOT project because it's on the corridor, or you can say funded by some of the state money. But I do think that it's important because, for example, the SR 210, what is that, 3552, that's $128 million cost that's allocated there. So the conversation really needs to be, if there is an expectation there's federal dollars or state dollars coming to that, then what's the local match? All of a sudden, that potentially frees up some cash for the rest of us, right? So I think it is important to have them as a part of the mix in this discussion. And before too long, I think we need to make a call on what's the local match amount to give us the highest likelihood of success going forward. So anyway, I throw that out as at least as an observation. And I think it's going to be important for us, and that might even ebb and flow, right? If it's a function of, we make the call at say 15% or 20%, whatever the number is, and then down the road we find that we can get money for less than that, cool. But it might be 25%, and we may have to make the call at that point. So I think it's an important piece of the conversation to keep them engaged in this as we're building the plan and truly start to hone in on what our regional investment and responsibility might be on.
Thank you for that. So again, I apologize, but Mark was on call from ADOT. Unfortunately, he had to leave, so he's no longer on call. But yes, so the response is ADOT is looking at those projects and they're coming back with a revised proposal.
They told you when to see that?
I was hoping it was going to be today, but since Mark is not on the call, I can't speak on his behalf.
You know, the corollary, I guess, to or the extension of your concern, Mike, is that the CAC and frankly TMC members as well, I'm sure, have looked at those really high numbers for this and for the I-10 projects, and I think tended to back away from them as being just too expensive, and you know, asking the question, why should RTA pay for that entire cost? And so seeing that ADOT has said, at least to us, that they expect that that there would be at least partial match, and that there would be other monies available down the road, but there's somewhat of an art involved with ADOT deciding how much of unknown future money can they commit to the region. We know that it may well be a PAG ADOT kind of joint decision, but there could be reevaluation of some of these projects as a result of a significant drop in the cost. I guess all I would say is that it's likely, in my view, that these numbers are going to come down significantly, and whether we need them just to get to 1.1 billion, whether we need that savings, or if it actually frees up other projects and perhaps even other ADOT projects for that matter, you know, I-10 jobs is a possibility, is still up there in the ether.
Tom, one of the things that I've thought about, and mentioned maybe a couple of meetings ago, was, and I'll use the term more holistic approach to funding the entirety of the program, which would include the regional dollars, all of the other stuff that's out there, all the other opportunities that are out there, so that at least we can paint a picture of what it could look like, which can help inform what those local match and local investments might look like. And then again, I'm still nervous about the cost estimates, but at least it gives us an idea. It's a little bit of a safety net in the conversation going forward, as I see it. But eventually that conversation has to come to conclusion as we start to put that package together that will hopefully ultimately resonate with the voter.
Go ahead, and then I'll comment back on what you said.
Just a question. I thought I had heard Rod Link say they were considering 20% of these projects, which we could like do right now. We could do it in your head as far as the projects. Is that what we're expecting? Because it is an art, and they're just coming up. I mean, it's all an art in my opinion, but all these costs. But if he was using that number, we could just plug it in for bookmarking sake.
We do not have an official revised number, but that's what we're waiting on. So hopefully once we have that official revised number, then we'll make the adjustment.
Am I remembering right that was the
there were numbers thrown out, and I don't want to put any words in their mouth, so I would wait until I get an official number from ADOT. So along those lines, again, so really the exercise would be that if there is some reduction, that's great. And we all know because of cost estimates, there will be some increases. So I think we're still in the same kind of a balancing act until we get concrete numbers. Yes.
Two quick thoughts to help kind of whittle this down a little bit. In a previous discussion, did this group land on supporting the Colossal Cave corridor and not support necessarily the Marianne Cleveland ones? So that's one question that might help whittle this down a little bit.
Correct.
And the other thought is just thinking politics, you know, to have a sponsored project on here, number one or number two, and have it fall off the list of funded projects just politically doesn't seem to be very attainable. So I would recommend that we take the Mary Ann Cleveland project off of this list, and we take the number one and number two ranked projects. There's South Tucson, Oro Valley, and Sahuarita, and put them in the funded list, just from a political standpoint. And then we can start whittling, we can start making some decisions on these.
Great approach. Yes. So you had your answer to the question was our recommendation to CAC would be not to include Mary Ann Cleveland section. So that can come off the list. And then, yep, at your pleasure, we can provide feedback to CAC which other ones to take off.
My recommendation is we would take the Mary Ann projects off.
Yep.
Not fund them.
Correct.
And the number one and number two ranks for South Tucson, Sahuarita, and Oro Valley would
Stay
remain
on
the list.
Stay on. Yep. Got it. Okay. Any other suggestions for what should come off this list?
Yeah, the 36th Street overpass was briefly discussed, I think, with the CAC. Just, I think they were looking for some feedback as Shane has just provided us. And the question about that one, I think, was whether that was going to also connect with I-10, what kind of other projects might be needed to go with it. And I don't know the answer to that.
So we'll follow up with South Tucson on that project. I think there was a question about grade separation versus overpass. So we'll get some feedback from South Tucson.
Can I just do a check-in then with staff? By taking the Mary Ann roads off, what's the delta that we're looking for to get to that 1.1 billion? And then that might help with this list a little bit.
You go back to the list of 40 instead of 41.
I'd like to make a clarification too on our other project while he's pulling that up. When we called it down, TMC exercise or workshop, we took off all our other projects. So although that is a 5, the existing one became a 2. So I don't know if that incorporates kind of the update.
We can definitely, as you recall, we had that conversation that we can convey that now it is your number 2 priority.
I will convey the thoughts of the group to remove at least the city segment of taking away. But that's the only project of substance that's in the southeast in the city. And look at Fort Breeze, it's one of the only projects. And that's I'm hearing everything that's being said, but it might be the reality that we're gonna have to face it.
What you want to take on.
I'll let you know what county project I want to take on.
Not what I'm looking.
Yeah.
I'm doing a wrap.
So I'm just letting you know, I mean, that is a reality for us, and I think.
So I know.
Going back to the geographic distribution, I think that will be an important one, so just be aware.
So Terry needs to leave, and if he does, we were going to lose our quorum. So let's answer Shane's question, and then we're going to adjourn.
So, looking at the list of 41 that came out of the CAC, that's 1.398, including the full cost of the ADOT projects. The 2 Mary Ann Cleveland comes up to 51 million.
All right, so we're down to 1.35. We're still 250 over our target.
At this rate, 2026 will be there.
Okay, with that, thank you all. I really appreciate it. Unfortunately, we're not going to have a quorum, so thank you for being here and we are adjourned.